meeting to order. Kate, can you call the roll?
Yes. Danielle Kraus will not be here today, and Steve Carreau will be running late. Next, I have Steve Roundtree,
Yes.
Everett Nelson,
Present.
Barb Hart,
Here.
thank you, Scott Papich,
Here.
Andrew Dewart,
Here.
Nathan Smallwood, Trustee Corvalon.
Here.
Thank you all. And Nathan Smallwood just joined us.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments on the consent agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move. Second.
Kate, can you call the roll?
Yes.
Thanks.
Steve Roundtree,
Yes.
Everett Nelson,
Yes.
Barb Hart,
Yes.
Scott Papich,
Yes.
Andrew Dewart,
Yes.
Nathan Smallwood.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Okay. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? I can't see online yet. Kate, I'm still trying. No, okay. Seeing and
There's
hearing
nobody online from the public.
none. Can move into the agenda. Kate, do you want to lead the? Yep.
All right, this evening I'm very, very excited to have two items about wayfinding that helps us get going. The first item is the Merge Wayfinding Construction Administration proposal. The Wayfinder Committee, together with Merge Design, is now at the point of having the following ready to implement the wayfinding project in 2025. The RFP, which is our next item this evening, the necessary bid documents, which are also included with your next item, as well as the design intent drawings, and the project budget estimate, which we have listed here as $290,000. Merge has now produced all deliverables under the agreement for services. To complete the implementation of the wayfinding project in 2025, construction administration services are needed. Merge has been working with the DDA for 4 years and is currently working on several projects in Colorado, so they are familiar with working in the state and the cost of current projects. The proposal represents a request for additional services from Merge to act as the agent of the NDDA during the implementation of this phase of the wayfinding project. The following bid review and construction administration tasks will be performed. They'll assist with bid review, the pre-bid meeting, bidders' questions. I will act as the contact during the bidding process and put questions out to everybody, but I would be working very closely with Merge. They'll review the bids with us and the wayfinding committee to confirm compliance with the drawings and the unit cost and appropriateness. And as it's noted here, we're coordinating all the bid process tasks, including advertising, administration, and receiving of bids and bids tabulation. That I will be doing. With construction administration.
Oh, sorry. Gotta mute.
All right, so Merge will come out and field verify and mark out the final sign locations placement with the contractor prior to installation, and they'll attend construction meetings via teleconference as well as I will. Review and approve submittals, shop drawings, product sheets, and material samples. Review and assist with graphic layouts, provide information during the fabrication and installation process, and prepare the punch list. And then they'll come out and have another field visit to ensure that the project is complete and that we accept. And so the total for all of this, they've broken out the different costs, but the total is $16,500. The Wayfinding Committee is recommending acceptance of Merge's proposal for construction administration. And for financial considerations, this is included in the $400,000 budget. So the current cost estimate that we have is, as I said above, $290,000, and that's for installation and fabrication. With that, $1,650 gets us to $298,067, and that includes, again, this proposal. So we're still well within our budget. And one of the things that we did talk about is there's a couple of signs that we thought about possibly adding on, and this was something that Steve Carreau and I talked about. We have until March to add a few signs. So we were going to go out to bid versus putting a bunch on there and then having to cut. We just thought we'd take phase one out like everybody agreed on. And then if there is a possibility to add a few signs, the Wayfinding Committee may come back and talk about that. But we have a little bit of room until March, or if there's something that can help with paid parking, that there's a little wiggle room there and some budget wiggle room that we could, work on that, but that wouldn't be considered until a little bit later. Right now, it's just about lifting this and doing what we've vetted and been basically sitting on go with. So you'll see that I've included the Merge's construction proposal. So the questions for the boards tonight is, do you approve continued work with Merge for construction administration? And does the board approve acceptance of the proposal for Merge for construction administration? And I've included possible motions for you as well.
Thanks, Kate. Steve, do you want to start since you're wayfinding?
I don't have anything to add to this. Thank you for pulling it all together.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Wanted to just go around the room and online. So Scott.
So I just have two questions. First, so this amount, 298, this includes everything to entirely complete the wayfinding project all the way to the end, 100%, right? With the exception of the possible couple.
Kate, I don't hear your answer. I don't think your mic is on.
So sorry, my mic was not on.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm sorry. So I'll go back to that. Yes, that gets us with phase one and construction administration, and it does leave us wiggle room to add a few more signs from phase two that we thought could be helpful. But right now, based on costs and based on everything, we just wanted to get it out there and get going. So there's nothing new in there, if that's kind of what you were wondering. If there's nothing new that.
Yeah, no, I'm not wondering if there's anything new. I just want to make sure that we're covering the whole thing. But you say phase one, is there a phase two, and what's in phase two?
Do you want to answer that, Steve?
I think if you go back to like the original documents, there were some signs that were really outliers that were further out.
They're way outside of our district.
They're outside of the district, and there's already signs there. So there was a bunch of conversation around like, do you know how much effort would have to go into like working with the Forest Service and the City of Boulder and all those entities that have their own signs? And is there, what value is being added? So those, I think, were on the initial map, and that's the stuff that's kind of phased out.
Okay, so that stuff in phase two is, we don't actually even have to execute on it if we don't want to down
Exactly.
the road. Okay.
This is the important stuff that gets us what we've been talking about.
Okay. And then the other question I have we been explicit in our intent to incorporate the new town rebranding imagery?
Oh yeah,
into
yes,
everything?
yes. So I can show you that when we get to the next piece. It's in the drawings. The intent drawings is what the attachment is called, and all of that is in there in that. So all the right colors, all the right letters, but that's also part of what paying for Merge as a construction administrator gets, is somebody in the details, in the weeds like that every day, making sure that that installation and fabrication goes correctly.
Okay. You know, I have to tell you, I mean, those were my two questions. I looked at the images that were in the document. They look pretty cool. They're bigger than I expected. There might be the tallest things in town, but they look good. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone online, Everett or Barb, like to jump in?
I don't have any questions. I've been following this or part of this for what seems like longer than I've been on the DDA, so I think it's time to move forward.
My only question is, are these signs going to be MUTCD compliant?
What is NETCD? So our wayfinding
The
consult.
MUTCD is a manual on uniform traffic control devices. It regulates all signs throughout the United States as far as height. Doesn't matter if it's on the road or not. And as far as pictograms, so that the pictograms are universal, i.e. you go to Europe, the sign for the bathroom is the same as the sign in the United States. They also need to be sure that they're retroreflective, at least up to 80% retroreflectivity, in case somebody calls in and says, hey, I fell down and hurt myself over here on whatever trail. And then at nighttime, the rescuers know where to go because the sign is retroreflective. That is the standard that is set by the MUTCD, which is the standard set for all signs for federal, state, municipal, county, doesn't matter. That's my only question.
So I'm not going to say yes for sure because I'm not 1,000%, but they went through and they did it. I know that I put into the bids that they had to conform with all the different things. We can certainly add that to there, that it must be, but I'm almost positive that it is already, but I don't want to just say that if I'm wrong. So I'm happy to confirm that with them. Oh, John's got something to say.
I've done similar RFPs recently, and you can just put that as a spec. Like
Okay.
that you're just asking for that. It's not hard to get it.
Yeah, I because that's why I'm looking. I think it might even be in these, just the drawing intent, the design intent, but because I can't do that fast enough, I don't want to say that, but I can definitely make sure that we include that in our notes to him and make sure that that is in the RFP and any documents that it needs to be in.
Go ahead.
I just had a question. Can you repeat was that?
Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD. So the reason I'm asking is it provides a lot of protection for us from liability. So it regulates sign height. So if somebody's riding a mountain bike, they come ripping down a trail and clip a sign with their head because the sign's too low, we're liable for that, or whoever put the sign up is liable. That's all day, every day in court. And I put up, I don't know how many signs in my years of working on roads and in all phases. And it sounds small and trivial until somebody lays their head open on a sign and sues. And then it's not small and trivial anymore. And that's the only reason I'm asking. But otherwise, yes, I say yes to this.
MUTCD, right? So the consultant, John Bazio, he's going to check in with me here in a minute. So I'm just sending him an email to ask and have that.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Tanya, is there anything you wanted to add?
No,
Okay.
no,
Other
that's great. If this is the group the committee wants to go with, I support that decision.
Thanks, Sonia.
Nothing from me, Scott.
And I'm excited to see this go. Glad that you brought that up, Everett. We'll certainly follow up on that.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
That was.
The consultant just checked in and I just sent him the email. So I'll have hopefully a message back here in a second.
Okay. Well, I mean,
I'll make a motion to approve the proposal to continue working with Merge for construction administration services to implement the wayfinding project in compliance with all potential regulations.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, will you call the roll?
Steve Roundtree,
Yes.
Everett Nelson,
Yes.
Barb Hart,
Yes,
Scott Papich,
Yes.
Andrew Dewart,
Yes.
Nathan Smallwood.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Okay. I just want to say also Everett and Barb and Tanya, you missed out on butter cookies for not being here, so.
Yeah, I vote yes as well. So
Okay.
Butter cookies?
Yep.
Are they Danish butter cookies? Oh, man, come on. I should have. No.
They're not compliant.
All right. Well, now that we're on our wayfinding kick, so now that we have a construction administrator, I do want to make a note that I will meet with Merge hopefully in the next day or two to confirm dates that I will update into the RFP. Because as you will have noticed, I didn't have dates in there yet because I didn't want to put anything in there without having an administrator and making sure that those times and dates worked for them, since they're going to do the pre-bid conference for us in that. So getting into the RFP. The Wayfinding Committee, together with Merge, is now at the point of having all the documents ready to implement wayfinding in 2025. We have included in this item the draft request for proposal, the necessary bid documents, design intent drawings, and the project budget estimate, which is approximately $290,000. We do have a separate spreadsheet that has all of that broken out, but I did not want to put that in the meeting packet because this is going out to bid. And if you're a really smart contractor, you'll look and see all that. So that's why I don't have that, but I gave you the number that comes in on there. Merge has now produced all the deliverables under the agreement. To complete the implementation of the wayfinding project, a request for proposals needs to be released. This RFP was developed with Merge and the Wayfinding Committee. Attached is a vetted draft RFP, including necessary bid documents. The final design drawings are also included. The Wayfinding Committee recommends the acceptance of the RFP for release in November after a construction administrator is in place. And again, with the financial consideration, this is all included in the wayfinding budget of $400,000. The current cost estimate is $298,067, including construction administration services and a 10% contingency. And because of wonderful timing, John just responded and said that yes, the signs meet the 2023 MUTCD section 2D.55 community wayfinding.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's international?
And the international.
Is it international?
What do I need to ask for international code?
International, the pictures, symbols used on signs are international. So like telephone booths or, a hospital over here or whatever, if there's no universal pictograms used on our signs, we have nothing to worry about.
So there's not universe. What's the question? I just want to make sure I'm following it. Everett?
Oh, I didn't have a question. I was just answering the universal pictogram issue. It applies to like hospitals, emergency services, police, things like that but we aren't using any of that. We don't have anything to worry about.
No, we are not. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to ascertain. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So, I got through that. So you'll see that we have attached in the packet the draft request for proposals, all the bid documents, and the design intent drawings. So the question before the board tonight is, does the board approve the wayfinding RFP for release in November 2024? And I have a possible motion there listed for you.
Do we want to go around the room quickly on any questions on the RFP? Steve?
I don't have any questions.
Comments,
No questions, no.
Scott? Anyone, Barb, Everett, or Tanya, anyone online have any questions or comments on the RFP itself?
I don't.
I don't have any questions.
Okay,
I'll make a motion to approve the wayfinding RFP for release in November 2024.
I just wanted to give Nathan a chance if he had comments or questions.
Sorry,
but
I
that's
thought
okay.
everybody went.
It's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Comment, and I'm ready to second the motion.
All
Okay.
right. Steve Roundtree,
Yes.
Everett Nelson,
Yes.
Barb Hart,
Yes,
Scott Papich,
I want to thank the Steves and Kate for putting so much work into this thing over the past a long time.
a long time.
And yes, I'm a
Thank you.
yes.
Andrew Dewart,
Yes,
Nathan Smallwood.
Yes, and thank you.
Thank you all. All right.
Hey, Kate, I'm here too. You haven't asked me to vote on anything yet.
Remember, we take roll, but the liaison does not vote
Since when?
since July.
Oh,
Remember, we talked about it. We can talk about it again if you need to. But that's just common practice for the state of Colorado. So next we have a request from the town of Nederland and Nikki for holiday lights. Let me get them. I don't know if I don't see Nikki on,
Nikki
so
with
I'll
us?
just do this with her here. The Parks Department has recently purchased holiday lighting items, including solar lights, decor for the traffic circle, and 12-foot outdoor trees for Town Hall. The total expenditure for these items is $865.40. These enhancements aim to uplift community spirit and create an inviting atmosphere for both residents and visitors during the holiday season. From the town's viewpoint, the financial consideration is this reimbursement would help offset the costs incurred by the Parks Department and allow further budget allocation toward other community-focused projects. The lighting and decor are intended to enhance the downtown area, which aligns with the NDDA's mission of fostering an appealing and vibrant community environment. And I would add under financial considerations that this fits into your special events budget, and you do have $865 still available from the year to do this. And I know that people have talked about wanting to make sure that town looks its best during the holiday season. So the question before the board from the town in Nederland is, would the NDDA be willing to reimburse the Parks Department for the $865.40 spent on these holiday lighting items? And the receipts have been included here.
okay, thanks, Kate. Start on Steve again. You got
I just start and make a motion. This doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of conversation. Can we just
Okay.
make a motion and vote
Yeah.
on it and move
Sure.
forward? I'll make a motion to reimburse the Parks Department for $865.40 spent on holiday lighting items.
my second.
All right. Steve Roundtree,
Yes.
Everett Nelson,
Yes.
Barb Hart,
Kate, just really quick, can you can you say where those lights are going to go? Was any of that not on First Street?
traffic circle, town hall. If you're wondering about the shopping center, I don't think it's going over in that area, and John can confirm that.
We don't own any property in the shopping center. It's going on town-owned property.
Okay, so we're forgotten again. Got it. I guess, yes.
Oh, that's accurate. That's not accurate. I think that we don't put town-owned Christmas lights right now on any town property that's not owned by the town. That's certainly a conversation we could have, though, and I'd love to have it with you, but that's kind of not a thing that happens anywhere. Is, you know, there's permission from the property owners, but I think that's something we could talk about.
I think it would be important because that whole south side of town always gets forgotten.
And like I noted, there's just no town property there that's easily identified, but maybe we could do that work together and make sure that we get that figured out.
Okay.
Thanks, Barb. Scott Papich,
Yes.
Andrew Dewart,
Yes.
Nathan Smallwood.
I'm a festive butter cookie yes on that one.
Thank you.
Well, I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about some funding that you had in your budget this year for parking. As you all know, we've been talking about a managed parking program in Nederland, and I think that a pilot program is likely to run next year. We're still working on the contract just a little bit. And the intention of the program would be to run a pilot program in the summertime in the multimodal transportation plan, and a little bit in alignment with the comp plan. We did some traffic analysis and found that there is a reason to manage parking in Nederland. We do frequently hit capacity issues with the parking that we've identified in town. And so what I really want to do is make sure that if we build a managed parking program, it's effective and it works as intended. And what that really means is that it doesn't challenge residents to park. Residents should be able to park for free easily. It shouldn't challenge employees to park. The same should be true, and it should be safe to walk to your car and all of these things that we want for good community values. And from a visitor perspective, we want to make sure that they can easily access parking and get to their destinations or move around the entirety of the town, so not one section of the town or another. In the sub-area plan, and I think also in the multimodal plan, there's contemplated several parking areas that could be used to help manage parking resources. And in a typical managed parking program, what you see is a variety of different zones. There may be free parking zones that are more on the periphery. There may be paid parking zones that increase in price and length of stay depending on the kind of the priority of that parking, I guess. Like something maybe directly on First Street, maybe slightly different situation than it would be in the visitor center parking lot, for instance. I may be wrong, but I think we have identified several hundred spaces in the downtown area that could be utilized for parking. We have been having some conversations since I got here also with RTD to try to better manage that parking space. You know, they have their own police enforcement and things like that, and there's a lot of different considerations there. But overall, what we're trying to do is build just a really contextual program that manages those resources in a way that is good for residents and also good for people who are visiting. So Kate and I were talking a few weeks ago. I think that you had set aside some money in your budget this year to better manage parking. And one of the things that we could do, and this would need to wait a little bit until the contract is finalized with the BOT, but what we could do is do a audit of these parking spaces that were identified in the comp plan and the multimodal plan, and look at things like striping and parking space size, and make sure that they're easy to utilize, and that when the parking management company comes and builds their online digital resources, which will point people to the parking, and they use something called Tap and Explore. And what it is kind of just an overlay on a map of Nederland that has points of interest. So business owners could have their businesses on there, parking resources would be available on there, and it would just kind of be like the digital version of the wayfinding that you just approved. And so what we have been contemplating is, once this contract is done, we could do something with that team, the parking management team, to go through and set up all this parking and make sure everything has all these things right, so that when we turn the parking on, everything is the way it needs to be. And we know what our inventory is, we know where we're pointing people, we know everything about the program and how it should run, so that we kind of get the best foot forward and we're not, kind of trying to figure it out as we go. Parking management programs can be scary, I think, in the outset for people, just because you don't know what's going to happen and you don't know who's getting charged and what's going to happen. But if we can take some time in this beginning phase and really set it up properly, I think it would be a good thing and a good potential partnership for the DDA and the town to work on together. So that's what you have before you this evening, is a consultant contract with them to do that work. Again, as I said, we've still got to finalize the contract, and this wouldn't happen unless that happens, which I'm anticipating is sometime in December. would be done. And then we would be doing this work maybe January, February. And at the same time, we'd also be working on the community engagement piece of this, making sure residents are registered and know how to park, and that, we get the employees taken care of and all that kind of stuff. So if you have questions for me about what we have been talking about, I'm here to answer them.
Thanks, Jonathan. I remember that, this clearly, and definitely thinking that we had carved out funds for this, and I think this consultant should be, in my opinion, it's a really good idea. So that's my thoughts. Steve? Yeah.
Thanks, John, for walking through this and explaining why this is important. And no other comments.
Scott?
Jonathan, I've never looked at a contract with a parking management firm before. Is this typical pricing for what they're intending to do over the course of 2 months?
No, and I think that that's something that I should elaborate on a little bit. This work, I don't know exactly that I'm comfortable with that scope of services for a final version. And I would be comfortable bringing this back forward if you want. We have some time this spring to look at it, but what I really wanted to do is present it and make sure you understood where we're going. I am still working on the contract with the contractor for the overall management program, and I can dial this in a little bit. I understand where your concerns are coming from. And what I would like to have here is a scope of service that really kind of looks at the work that Cheney and her team did and in these planning efforts and looking where these parking places are, and making sure that we have them signed appropriately in all these things that I was talking about. But I could bring back a finalized version of this before you would want to sign it. And that might be the best approach here, because then you're taking action after the contract exists. And this would just be like an addendum.
So it's 400 spaces. Does it seem like a proper number, 400 parking spaces?
I think Cheney is going to tell me if I'm wrong, and I know that I probably am going to be, but I think that we identify between public and private resources and potentially developable areas of 1,100 spaces that could be potentially a part of this program. That doesn't mean they'd all be paid parking places, but there would be residential concerns and things like that. So it is a relatively significant inventory.
Does this whole parking management program even move forward without engaging with these guys? Or are we just shooting in the dark if we don't have somebody who's done this before?
I've done this before. I'm your expert.
Have you worked with these guys before?
Yes.
Interstate? You like them?
Yeah. Yes.
Feel
I
like
can manage them, I guess I will say.
That's the answer I was looking for. Okay. No more questions right now, but thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Barb? Or Everett, anyone online?
I guess I just have a quick question. So when I'm at my shop, I see people will roll up, park, and walk off, fill up the Kathmandu parking lot where we have all our shops, and walk off for hours on end. Is there any way we're going to consider mitigating that? Are we going to reserve parking, at least maybe 1 or 2 for shops that are existing, or is it all going to be paid?
I think that is a community conversation that we could have. I will tell you, best practices is not to reserve spaces like that on right away, but there is management practices that would take care of what you're talking about. And there's ways to build context into here to make sure that there's spaces for people to park close to you and that you don't see that kind of set it and forget it mentality where people are gone. And I think what this would do is this management program would give us what we usually call like a parking ambassador, who would be walking around town, and they would be able to give violations to people, but they could also be providing information and things like that to folks. And so what we've typically done in the past is have programs where we can validate and would do different things to make sure that people can access the businesses that they want to go to as close as possible. And I think it's just something that we have to build in the management structure of the program. And that's what we need to do this spring is really have this little bit more community conversation about things like that we just need to plan for in the equation.
Thank you.
So I'm having problems with my microphone, and I'm on my little tiny laptop, and my fingers are too big, so I apologize. I have been against paid parking since the very beginning. I think that it's going to overburden the places that won't have paid parking, including where the music store is and everything pretty much on the south side of the creek. We have a very small amount of parking also adjacent to Kathmandu, and we need it. We have our employees that come there, and I'm not comfortable voting for this without having a lot more information, including where those 400 parking spaces are and where the paid parking is going to be.
Thanks, Barb. Nathan?
Yeah, hi, John. I guess my question for you is, what's the specific deliverable that the consultant gives, and kind of what's the problem we're trying to solve? So there's tight parking. So in other words, how do we measure success? Is it increased parking efficiency? Is it increased satisfaction? You know, any way you look at it, we have a shortage. And so can you just give me a little bit of an idea of what the specific deliverable will, how do we know we hit success when the day's done?
I think the finding actually is that there is parking. There's enough parking. It's just not being managed.
Okay.
And so what we're seeing is something like Everett noted, where people will park once and then they go about their day, or maybe they're parking and then going somewhere else for an adventure. And so I think that's what the control is that we need to control for making sure that parking is safe and accessible to residents, and that there is parking close by businesses. So that's really what you want to do with a program like this.
Okay.
And these programs are successful when they progressively allow communities to still access community resources, which currently is not something that always happens. So I think that overall, the success of this program is having a successful trial that says whether or not a managed parking program will work in Nederland. And that would take place over next summer, when we know that tourist season is the highest, when we're seeing 6,000 cars a day down the highway. And that's why we need to do this program. When you look at, I think this really speaks to your wayfinding conversation. I'll tell you, as a person, I've been coming to Nederland my whole life, but just recently started spending every single day here. I don't think people know about parking resources that we have now. I think that they see the visitor center parking lot, and I think it's very difficult to understand like where you go next after that and like how you do that. And I think we see a lot of circling because that causes additional CO2 emissions, and it causes safety hazards, and it means that people are driving around when they maybe don't have to. Whereas if we really identify these parking places, which you've done with the wayfinding program, and then really make sure they're striped appropriately and signed appropriately, and I think we can be honest, there's some confusion with what's happening in different parking areas around town. If we can address that and become more consistent, I think we're going to be successful. I also think that in every community that has implemented this program thus far, the success has come from this community-driven approach. And I think that managing resources is what we're trying to do in a way that works for Nederland. It's not the same. This program has been implemented. I've implemented it in 3 communities. It's been implemented in probably 15, the same model. And basically what makes it successful is when it becomes a Nederland program. We need to have a contextually sensitive solution to what we're doing. And that's why things like how we treat things on the south side of the creek are important. And there's things that the property owners could do. There's kind of a cool thing you can do with private property owners. If they want to use, like say you're a church and you have a big parking lot, you could turn it off on Sundays or when you need it for just your people, and then you could turn it on at different times. There's a lot of flexibility you can do, and it allows property owners to maybe use their resource and manage it where they're still getting impacted now, and that's just very apparent when you look at what's happening. But this gives them an ability to control that based on what they're looking for. And so the reason I think that this could be a good idea, and again, we could do it without. I think this is not something that you have to feel obligated to do. But what it will do is it will let us make sure that we start off with everything identified, all the models kind of built out financially, so that it has its kind of the best foot forward. Because ultimately what you want it to do is be invisible to people. Like a tourist isn't going to notice when they want to go and pay parking. If they're going to go for 3 hours, they're going to pay, you know, whatever the small amount that it ends up being is, and it's not going to be a huge impediment, especially if we can build some really cool marketing around it, which is a very easy thing to do. And then for a resident, the key is that residents don't get impacted and they can find parking because you're going to have turnover. And that's kind of what the program is designed to do. Typically, you create an economic incentive, and that's something the DDA would need to be really involved in. When I've implemented this before, we've done a lot of studies to look at what the average shopping trip is and what it should be, which I think the average shopping trip in the mountain downtown should be 3 hours at minimum. If you can figure out what that is and what it should be, and you start building targets based on that, it becomes a really cool tool to make sure that people can enjoy your town and they don't come to the point where they're like, oh, well, the parking is taken, I'm just going to drive to the next place. And that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that that turnover happens and we reduce circling and all the kinds of negatives associated with it.
Thanks. I'm one of those guys who circles and just drives in one direction away from my destination until I find a spot. So I think it could be really helpful. Thanks. Good answer.
One last note, it is a trial program no matter what, but this program would be to identify parking spaces and improve them, which will benefit the town no matter what and the downtown. And I think if there is interest on the south side of the creek, even by property owners that want to look at how they might benefit from something like this, and like, even if it's free parking, but just having the ability to manage things a little bit more proactively, that is certainly something we can do and should do.
And from your experience, has enforcement been a key part of that then?
Yes, and I'll tell you, I think that on average, in all the communities that implement this, typically the goal is to not have citations because they're just not they're not what you want. And typically you see citations about 5% or less of what average transactions are. And that's fairly consistent. And I have data that I could show you about that if you'd like to see it. The other thing is that a lot of times what ends up happening with citations, because of the way that they're put together, is it's just a good tool, because you can work with people. You can use it as, like, say, you know, we have these rules here, just please understand our rules. Next time you come back, you know, make this change. You can give free parking away, which is always good. The program I'm most familiar with is the Idaho Springs one, but they give away over $500,000 of free parking a year. And that's not just their residents, like people in Gilpin, people here, anybody that needs to park, they pretty much give it to them. Because the whole point is you just want the people who are kind of passing through to think about their choices when they're there, basically.
Thanks, John.
Could I ask another question?
Sure, Scott, of course.
Jonathan, is the main point of this agreement that's on the table right here is it to make recommendations on how a program should be run, or is it to actually create the program and then manage it on an ongoing basis?
No, I will do that part, the management. And that's what I was saying. This program is kind of like a would be nice thing. And I will say it would be really nice, but what it would do is make sure that we've got all these parking spaces identified. And like, if there's things that would be, maybe there's things that are long-term parking spaces that could be parking someday, and just make sure that we have that all figured out and that we have the actual count of what should be parking set. The other thing that I just want to mention is there is residential really closely tied into our NDDA, like right in the boundaries basically, and you know, right outside, which we all know. And we know that people looking for paid parking are gonna kind of park wherever they think they can. The other thing this would do was allow us to create a residential, potentially a protection program for some of those streets so that they are limited to residential parking, which I know we have some challenges, especially on First Street with that. So what this would do is it would give me a little bit more capacity, because now parking is the one thing I'm doing, but there's just a lot. But this would give me the capacity to make sure I set everything up correctly. And then if the pilot program does not work, we would still have the resources essentially, which would be, we have all this parking. You basically have that parking mapped out already, but what it would do is kind of formalize things. Look at the parking behind the gas station, for instance. We could clean that up a little bit, make sure it's striped. I think Cheney made a recommendation in the visitor center lot to change the flow there. We can look at that and see like if an overlay is something we could do this year. There's like about maybe 20 different things, and I can, like I noted, I can improve the scope of service and bring it back to you for action with more information once that contract is signed, if that's something you guys would like to do. But I would say we don't move forward with the contract. I mean, you could, if you want to say this is a good idea, we could, and then we could bring it back once we know for sure that this is the path forward.
So it would behoove us to do this before we get completely committed on where everything's going to be with wayfinding. So it could be integrated into it, correct?
I don't think that's a terrible idea, but I know you guys have been waiting on wayfinding for a long time, and I think we could put some signage up, additional signage from this parking program that could just supplement that maybe and maybe building off your brand strategy, because they're going to have signage they have to install anyway.
And we talked to Merge about this too. So it could be something that, you know, we come back after this and we say, hey, we saw that these were, you know, let's finish up wayfinding. Let's spend a little bit of money on these few signs. So there's definitely some flexibility for us to go. But we did talk to Merge about our things, and he was talking about how he wanted that a lot of it was interchangeable, that we could make some variations and we're not boxing ourselves in with any of our signs. And that was the thing Steve Crow and Steve Roundtree and I really want to make sure that nothing is actually limiting, because we are working on paid parking. So
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, to me, just final thought is that just the fact that this would help be a kind of a big overview and analysis and help identify potentially even additional parking and make recommendations on how to management. I think this is, and you know, I believe Jonathan when he's, you know, that he believes this is a good idea. And I also think that, you know, paid parking is probably one of the better, one possible way to get help with town's budget. So I'd like to make a motion to approve the funding and execution of the consultant agreement for parking implementation.
I'll second that.
Kate, can you take the roll?
So you want to keep it as is instead of come back with it?
Steve Crow is here now, and on my randomness, you are the first vote. I'm sorry about that for you.
I'll abstain because I haven't
You just
been
got
prepared
it,
for
yeah,
this.
yeah.
Sorry, I've just been running around.
No problem. Thank you. Steve Roundtree,
Yes.
Everett Nelson,
Yeah.
thank you. Barb Hart,
No,
Scott Papich,
Yeah, okay. Yes.
Andrew Dewart,
Yes.
Nathan Smallwood.
Yes.
Thank you all. Well, thank you all. We're through the action items, and now we're up for our presentation on the plan of development and the downtown sub-area plan next steps with Cheney Bostic here.
All right, thanks. You can. All right, Kate's gonna share the presentation, just a few slides, and I think you've had a chance to review it. Hopefully you all have done your homework and we can just roll up our sleeves and get to work. But to start this discussion, we asked for a meeting with the board to go over the downtown sub-area plan draft. It's in draft form, so nothing is set in stone. We wanted to check in with the DDA on the recommendations of the draft plan, because we have, as stated in the goal, yes, you're on the right slide. So we have been working under the comp plan. We being Studio Seed is under SE Group's team for the comp plan. The downtown sub-area plan was part of that scope of work that the town funded. In that work, we met with the DDA. I've met with Kate multiple times over the process of creating the downtown plan. We met with some board members. We met with downtown business owners. We were part of the DCI study, so we sat in on that, just listening to, so that we can weave in these issues and recommendations as they affect a lot of the DDA area. The further we thought about that and started talking to Kate, that the DDA has your plan of development. It was last updated in 2017, and that is your guiding document. Well, the town was going through this process to create another guiding document for downtown. And we decided that the best path forward is to have this serve as your updated plan of development and be a guiding document for both the DDA and the town so that we are on the same page. So it just takes a little bit more effort. Like this meeting tonight, we wanted to have an in-depth conversation with you all to understand these questions. Do you agree? What would you change? Is anything missing? And what are your priorities? So that when we get into the implementation chapter, we can write a plan of development that serves the DDA best. So with that in mind, next slide. This is in the plan and it shows the DDA boundary. So we did an exercise at the beginning of this project with community members, asking them what they thought downtown NED was, and we had them draw maps. So in the red on this boundary is the official boundary that we drew for the downtown sub-area plan. Now that we're talking about this being a DDA document as well, I just wanted to bring this up and show you that like everything that's colored pink is in the DDA, and then the pink dashed lines outside of the red are not currently in the boundary. It is easy to change that boundary and just include all of the DDA. The other thing that this map shows is the two areas that are not colored pink in the downtown sub-area plan boundary are the mill site and the open space around the creek that is privately owned, and then the more residential properties. So this is something to think about. I think we can come back to this. This isn't a big discussion point, but just food for thought. All right, so tonight we wanted to present the recommendations as they are in the plan and brainstorm with you those questions. So I'm going to introduce these two topics are very similar. They kind of jive together. So economic development, housing, and growth and character. Just walk you through those, and we'll pause under each of these topics in just a minute, but I want to set up the discussion. So next slide. Another map that is kind of describes a lot of what we're talking about in economic development, housing, growth, and character is a future land use map. This is something that is common and required in the comprehensive plan, and we just kind of zoomed into the downtown sub-area plan. So this is a future vision for these areas in terms of what types of land use. No big changes really in terms of like what zoning would allow or what is expected. The one thing is the mill site that is now industrial land, we are calling a future downtown flex because there is a vision for that area to include more of a mix of uses. Industrial isn't really appropriate anymore, and so and we really see that as an opportunity to extend quote unquote downtown. Next slide. So the next slide also shows where, so design standards and guidelines, the city has a document that I believe was created in 2012, maybe in the early teens. So it's a bit dated as well. It has some good stuff in it, but we took a look at that. This map shows where there's CBD, Central Business District, that's a zone district that is in that maroon color. Any future development has to abide by those guidelines. However, the body that approves them is the town board and planning commission, correct? So they use that as a guiding document. So we'll discuss kind of process. And then the blue dashed line is a new recommendation to create an overlay district that is specific to all of those properties between basically 2nd and the creek, and that front onto First Street. A major concern when we started this process from the community was the fear that any future development would diminish the character, the charm of your quaint street. So we have some ideas in the plan for that, and the town is considering actually moving into implementation of that very
So
soon.
the overlay district is an area that you're paying particular attention to as far as character goes. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
The area in the blue dashed line on that map was the area that was most critical because of the large development proposal that everyone knows about.
Got it.
And so that is really updating the zoning standards. So it's a CBD zone district now. We worked with the community. We did a couple workshops on this, and it would just modify some of the height and bulk standards to bring the scale of new construction down a little bit. It's not taking away development rights. You can still do 3 stories. We're just making it more contextual in terms of like stepping back that 3rd floor and doing some pitched roofs. So we talked about roof styles and things like that. So the framework for updating that and creating an overlay district is in the draft plan, if you read that. So and then it would also include some additional guidelines that aren't in the CBD guidelines. So next slide, are you on? Yep. Okay. So first, how existing recommendations in the downtown plan under economic development and housing is a big one to work to stabilize existing businesses. We have some bullet points and we go into a little bit of detail there. So things like surveying existing business owners. This is something that I think the DDA could assist with, creating a survey that goes out to business owners, understanding what are the needs, what are the issues, like really getting everyone on the same page, you know, and how comfortable are they? I know there are a few businesses that we've heard are thinking about leaving or closing shop. So this seems like a pretty urgent thing. Facade improvements and grants. This is another thing that DDAs are commonly will help fund. So if a property owner wants to make improvements to their storefront to make their building more appealing to customers, having a grant program. Do you have a grant program currently for facades? No. Okay, so I can give you a bunch of case studies on that, but that's something just, in the future, is that something the DDA wants to support? Supporting pathways to property ownership. This is, helping business owners that may want to own the property get there, and there are different ways to do that. Temporarily relocating businesses when redevelopment occurs. So if, properties on First Street redevelop, where do those businesses go in the interim? That's something that the DDA could help kind of find them a space. Marketing and social support. So this number 1 really is a kind of DDA heavy thing. Number 2, recruit new businesses. This is a town and DDA both. It takes everyone, but really helping to fill vacancy, recruit more local business, incentivizing businesses that grow jobs, and then incentivizing affordable and workforce housing and new development. So we make a recommendation. This is also in line with the comp plan to implement the housing needs assessment recommendations. So updating your code and looking at ways to incentivize an affordable workforce housing in downtown, because currently that's not required. There's no inclusionary or even an incentive program to ensure that workforce housing can exist. So that's just a measure to make sure that any housing that goes in downtown isn't super expensive and doesn't serve locals. Since writing the draft plan, we came to a planning commission meeting, and we did a public presentation. So some of the feedback that we've heard, and these are things that John, I think you and Kate are already working on, is creating. So these are things that we want to add already to the plan, is then thinking about creating this downtown vitality board, or a working board of downtown property stakeholders, just to have transparency, idea sharing, communication. Also looking at already beefing up recommendations around recruiting new businesses, because that is a current threat. adding potential, the local housing authority, which maybe you have an update on. So I wasn't aware of that, so that's good, and we can put that in the plan as well, working with the local housing authority. And then an updated market assessment to inform and guide market forces. So do you want to add anything, Jen?
No, I think the housing authority is not quite built yet. It'll be done sometime next year, likely.
Okay. So under economic development and housing within downtown, is there, these questions are here. Do you agree? Would you change anything? Is anything missing? And what are priorities that, because in the end, when we go into the implementation, we want to provide steps and clear action. We want to also allow flexibility because we know plans don't always get followed, exactly as they're written. But is anything in here, anything missing, anything?
Yeah, this is Tanya online. In your larger presentation under, I don't know what page it is, but it's number 3, encouraging adaptive reuse and activation of vacant buildings and sites. You have a whole lot of recommendations. I would like to see something of that nature also on this list.
Yeah, I think that's under growth and character and.
Okay, you got it somewhere else. All right, that's fine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
But also those facade and improvement grants, that's a way to do that. And I've worked with lots of DDAs that offer that. Even, small grants are helpful. Anything helps. Anything else? Economic development and housing, what are your priorities?
You, Cheney, for together. I mean, I think you listed a lot of good ones here. I just, the practical come back to me. I want to let me try and be a little more concise.
What's the word on this downtown vitality board? I want to make sure I have the right language. If it's in place, then.
Well, it's just an economic vitality meeting group. We've had one meeting and we'll have another one next week. Just trying to get everybody connected is really where we are with that, is just trying to create that consistency.
And so some of this, have you met?
Yes, we met last month and we're going to meet again next week.
What are you hearing from that group? Is there anything that should be included in a downtown plan? Any concerns or ideas that they've had?
I think we're early yet, but we're going to do it. We're going to try to start generating those problem statements. I'm on a side doing a town talk thing that we're doing with town staff. That's kind of like, basically, it's not the same thing, but it's kind of coordinated. So I think we're really trying to build the stakeholder groups right now is where we're at.
I mean, we heard the same things that are in here. Housing is an issue, parking, they're unsure about paid parking and what that's really going to look like. So those were the main things. And honestly, what was really nice about the first meeting is a lot of them just spent time connecting with each other, that they had different things that they needed and were able to work together. So that was one of the things from DCI, if you remember, that they wanted. So it kind of worked on 2 levels for that. And I don't know where it's going to go, but it's just building that consistency right now so that we can get those bigger stakeholders.
Okay. I think honestly, the way that I maybe should have done this backwards, because the last topic that we talk about is the most DDA heavy. So I think you guys will have more comments as we go on, but any others on economic development and housing? Did we miss anything?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts here. So when we talk about priorities, we've talked about this in the past. I think during most of the seasons here, we don't really have a hard time getting people to show up in town. That's not a real challenge for us. In fact, when we have a lot of people in town, people don't really like it that much, but you need them, right, for economics. I think a bigger challenge here for the businesses is having enough people, hourly people working, who have a place to live. So when we talk about affordable housing, I have to be honest, I don't know of an equitable way to do that where everybody in the community thinks it's fair and it's beneficial to the businesses and the community. So if there are other communities who have cracked the nut on this one, I'd love to see how they do it.
Mhm.
Every mountain town
Yep.
in the state has run into this problem. If they haven't, they're on their way to it. And,
Yep.
and it's been a long time coming here, and here we are. So love to know more about that. The other thought I have is in point one, you have support pathways to property ownership. And I think we have a challenge in this town because so much property is concentrated with a very small number of owners. And
Mhm.
people can't have a pathway to property ownership when it's not available. And so that probably deserves a larger conversation. But it's something that needs to be, I think, thought about.
Good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to expand and, what is incentivize affordable workforce housing in downtown where more density can be supported, and, how could the DDA do that? Have gotten some feedback from local property owners looking at projects and running projects where it's like the PIF fees were the big thing. Not that we're going to get away from PIF fees, but if there's some mechanism where the DDA could finance PIF fees, or I don't exactly know, what the ways to incentivize affordable and workforce housing, or it seems like those might be.
It's yeah, if the DDA is able to take care of parts of those performas so that they can allow for more savings for affordable housing, because workforce housing and affordable housing are two very different things. And inclusionary housing does one thing, all of these things have different levers that you can pull with them. But anything that the DDA can do to offset costs helps affordable housing happen more, can help it, if we leverage it that way with that intent.
I think there might even be a bigger conversation than just the DDA handling that, like us working in partnership to figure out what we can do there, because that's not a thing, like you said, it's not a thing, those costs don't go away ever, but if we could figure out a way to work together to make that better, I think that there's a real opportunity there, and there may be other outside funding sources we could start lobbying for.
Yeah, I agree that it takes all hands on deck. But just to answer your question about workforce housing, I work in a lot of mountain communities, and more these communities are starting to realize the deed restricted workforce housing. So you don't just have to meet an income requirement, but you have to prove that you work in the county for 30 hours a week or something to meet that workforce, to be able to live, so that you're ensuring that it's for local workforce.
That's cool. One of the challenges, one of the extra challenges in this town is we've got a lot of people who work jobs that are not necessarily long 10 and 15 and 20-year career positions, but they rotate every few months, right? And so that's an extra challenge, isn't it? So we got to find an equitable way that everybody in the community, or most people, can accept, and that works.
And the good thing is you have a housing needs assessment. It has a bunch of more detailed recommendations. So we're just kind of saying implement that. But I think it's really important for the town DDA to work together and just to realize, I think everyone realizes that if development happens in downtown, you don't want to let this opportunity pass you by, and you end up with super expensive housing and none available for the workforce.
I had a question about what does recruiting new businesses look like? How is that done?
Yeah, so I think the first step is, I included this as an update. I think do an updated market assessment to see what, what kind of market forces are out there, what's needed in the community. We surveyed the community. I mean, obviously services like pharmacy, medical, those are, more grocery options. But I think, leading that effort takes you don't have a chamber, do you?
They're just starting up again, and there's a peak-to-peak chamber too, so.
Okay, so I think it's, working with the chamber, working with the town, updating a market assessment, figuring out, all the tools, and really outreach. And, you've got some large property owners here that know a lot of people and have, access to kind of engaging and reaching out to, countywide operators that may be interested in filling a spot in Ned.
And how is that different from number 2 in this section about recruit new businesses, recruit local/services? Or is that basically the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, so recruiting local business was, obviously important. They want to make sure that, if businesses come in, they're locally owned. That was a important thing. And the services thing came from the engagement that we did that I just said, is like people acknowledge there's not enough grocery options, there's not enough healthcare options, and just having those daily services so that people don't have to drive to Boulder and other places to get those. Okay, anything else before we move on to growth and character? Thank you for that feedback. As I said, the conversation will get more. Okay, you're on growth and character. Okay, big recommendations in the plan is to, as I mentioned before, creating that First Street overlay district and design guidelines to guide new development to make sure that it fits the scale and character of the existing buildings. Updating the industrial zoning. These two are code related, and so the town will obviously lead that. I think it's just DDA support. Encouraging adaptive reuse. That is the comment that someone online made. So that's here is really, along with that growth and character, encouraging adaptive reuse, incentives to reuse structures, filling vacant storefronts. It's listed in kind of both of these: economic development and growth and character. Encouraging protection of historic assets. So the Wolf Tongue Mill, East First Street, those are potential historic districts. So just continuing to make sure that you prioritize celebrating the history of town. Additional, let's see. Oh, this is, I talked with John. So we're talking with the town about drafting that overlay and design guidelines so that it can be implemented as soon as possible. That's underway. And then there was a comment about developer agreements. Andrew, I think this came from our conversation at the public meeting. Ways to incentivize public-private partnerships to get something to happen downtown. But any other comments on growth and character? Again, this is pretty town heavy because it's code related. It's updating code and standards and things like that. But we heard adaptive reuse is important, filling vacant storefronts. What else in growth and character? Keep going if you don't have any comments. Okay.
I just want to add one thing. I think it's important to think about because the overlay district and design guidelines are, something that is going to come up and affects property values. And I mean, just personally, not against some design guidelines. I mean, when kind of the question of what makes Nederland, and that look of, not that, how to preserve the character and the look. So I think keeping in mind, design guidelines. I know that, to some people it's it will increase the cost of, or could increase the cost of any development. But I mean, I think this is fundamentally a kind of an existential issue that the town, that we are a town that has no really, I mean, limited design guidelines for our, downtown business core is something to just be aware of.
Yeah, and we started with the existing CBD guidelines. I think they're a good starting point. There were just a few things that we would add based on our conversations with the public and stakeholders downtown. I think the way that you run it now might be even more onerous on a developer, just because the town board has all of the authority. And so our recommendation is to actually have staff, your development review staff person who is a trained professional in the industry, to actually review those guidelines and approve them, and what recommend approval. It would still perhaps need to go to town board, but I think you need to revisit the way that you administer those guidelines too.
Yeah, there's also design guidelines that were created but not adopted. And that makes it confusing when people come to talk to us, because we do have confusion about some of this stuff. And I think this would give some clarity in this specific boundary about like how things work a little bit better. And like, I think even just bulk plan standards alone would be good to have a little bit more just clarity around.
Anyone else have any comments on the growth and character?
Okay, let's move on. Circulation, gateways, and parking. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so we have some diagrams in the plan that will be useful, and parking program was mentioned, and so we actually do have this diagram, for example. It gives you a first glance at those parking opportunities, and we even made recommendations about what should be future paid zones, where employee parking might go, and then what could be public parking, either free or RTD. So those dots are on the map. This kind of shows overall circulation. Recommendations are spelled out in the plan, but this graphically kind of outlines how the street network and flow would go, where on-street parking is, and where paid parking would be. Next slide. And then another diagram shows trails, sidewalks, safe crossings. So then this talks about the priority. So we do prioritize, like first priority future sidewalks is in the dark blue, and then second priority in the light blue, but just a framework for building out sidewalks in the future. Next slide. We worked with the Fair and Piers, who is the transportation master plan. They're putting that together at the same time, which is beneficial because we could coordinate with them. And so this is the refined and the proposed roundabout design and upgrades that they made. We do need to update our rendering. A few things have changed since then, but we do a couple of renderings that will include the plan just to have some eye candy, and this will help with going after grants. So a couple of those are in here. And then let's see, slide 15 shows the existing recommendations. So we'll do the same exercise here. So recommendations are in order, first implement Jefferson West First Street. The town already has engineered drawings of those. We made some comments, just some suggestions to update, like changing the circulation of the visitor center lot. Number 2, upgrading sidewalks to ADA. Second Street as a priority. There's a DOLA grant that this project would be perfect for. So finding funding, getting that done. Gateways, focusing on your gateways. You've got the signage and wayfinding plan, and I would say the next step then is to really beautify and signify your gateways, important intersections. So that's in the plan. Snyder Street Bridge is more of a longer term, you know, in the next few years, but really need to finalize design and of the bridge and get that ready to go. And then finally in parking, we have recommendations to create a parking management plan. You guys are well on your way, it sounds like, and to look for opportunities to increase parking supplies. So we're kind of on the same page there. And I'll work with Jonathan to update any language based on what you're already doing. So the one thing, so we included, so the big item under infrastructure is First Street. We included that in the next one. So anything besides First Street in terms of infrastructure, this is a conversation to talk about. We'll talk about First Street improvements in the next topic. So is everyone on board, agree? Do you have priorities? Are there things on this list that the DDA, you know, wants to take on sooner than later, like gateways?
I would think the two priorities would be a second bridge and sidewalks that are more permanent and useful for more people. Everything else is needed improvements, but those are must-haves, I think. I can be convinced otherwise. Anybody?
Yep, let's have a discussion about that. Is everyone?
Yeah.
And parking, I think.
Sure, of course.
Can you repeat yourself? Scott, I didn't quite get the gist.
Yeah, I said that I thought that two priorities, we talk about parking a lot, and I don't think we're going to forget about parking, but a second bridge in town, this is the first time it's been talked about this evening. I think that should be a priority. And as we've talked about many times, I think sidewalks that are more permanent and more useful for more users would also be a priority that we must have.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Regarding the bridge, I see Schneider Street being the name for where the bridge is going to be, but I think for documents, we might want to keep it ambiguous, just the bridge, because that's private property and there is no guarantee that we're going to be able to do that. But we do have our own property just over on East Street, over by there more, that could be built. But I just feel like for document purposes, it might be better not to assume we have use of that.
But still calling out that second bridge is a priority, right, Todd?
Yeah.
I just
Yeah,
want
I can see it in all the documents, Schneider Street Bridge, and I just feel like that's a little presumptuous. We don't have that property. But yeah, a bridge is important. I agree with Scott. Yes.
I want to go on a limb here for a second. When we talk about a bridge, I don't want the need for a second bridge to butt heads with the need to maintain character of the town. There is going to be a day when an engineer is going to come along and say, this bridge has to be shut down for 3 months to be rebuilt or 6 months to be rebuilt. And we won't have a way to get across town unless we bring in temporary bridges. And there's no reason for us to do that. We can see it coming. So I just think it should be a priority wherever it happens, someplace intelligent.
And Tanya, can you clarify for me what you were saying about alternative location for a second bridge?
We own a small parcel of land just past the last property on First Street towards the east. So it kind of would, if you would have to go in through Chipeta Park a little bit to build a road. So it's not as ideal as Schneider. And then you cross and you'd be right at East Street by the wetland project Fisherman's Lot. It's a small piece of land that, but it is owned by town. It would work if you had to, if we couldn't get access to Schneider Street.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
It could be along, like from Peakview and cut
well, you'd go through Chipeta Park and you'd have to widen that footpath for a little bit, but it's not all the way to the Weir. It's just past the pavilion, really, I think, if you look across. So it wouldn't, I mean, there is,
Okay.
it's not as ideal as Schneider Street, but, you know, we don't own Schneider Street area land, so.
Yep. Yeah, we looked at, there was a engineering study that looked at like 4 different locations, and it was, that was the preferred, like the least expensive, most engineered applicable location for it. But I hear you, allowing for flexibility is important, as I said, so.
I would just, second Scott's priorities there, just to emphasize the bridge, parking, so.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to recreation, tourism, and placemaking, which includes a lot of DDA-centered objectives. Map on this page is kind of highlighting all of the recommendations onto one graphic in the downtown area. So we are showing this idea that we've revived of a future downtown loop, shown in pink, where an interpretive trail, a series of small plazas and picnic areas, places for people to pause and hang out along the creek and other places in downtown. Those potential historic districts, really celebrating your historic place. A big idea is the First Street flexible street that we'll talk about, and adding lighting. So I was really happy you guys talked about holiday lighting, because I think that's one thing that we can build in this plan is more talk about having a holiday program could really benefit downtown. And driving in tonight, it was very apparent that it's up to individual business, whoever puts up their own lights, and it kind of looks like a mishmash, but it's cool to see the downtown lit up, and otherwise it wouldn't be. Okay, so existing recommendation slide next is to implement the signage and wayfinding plan. You guys are there. I don't even know if this needs to be in the plan, but I guess it still should be before they're in the ground. There was a discussion about a downtown maintenance district. This is something that the DDA would certainly lead. I wanted to ask tonight if that's something that is still desired. Is there a need for a coordinated maintenance district to maybe look at consolidated trash recycling receptors, consolidating trash pickup? I don't know how many operators you have, but that's something, just a more organized infrastructure for downtown businesses. Perhaps snow removal, cleaning of downtown sidewalks when you get them. I mean, that's a typical one, but you guys don't have sidewalks. And then First Street, Festival Street, and creek activation. This is defined in the plan. We have some preliminary concepts, but really moving that design forward and working. This will be a joint effort between the town DDA, but determining the best path forward for the future of First Street. Adding pedestrian lighting. This is something that town DDA could partner on. And then adding those plazas and pocket parks, and these can be, on public property or working with individual property owners, but just adding more interesting places in downtown. So, and we have a lot of ideas in the plan about that, but at a high level, these are the recommendations. So I think we can open it up to the same questions and discussion here. Ideas. I'm going to add a holiday lighting program, unless anyone disagrees with me. I think that, okay. That was discussed tonight. So making sure that you think about that in the future and creating, what about winter festivities? Like to increase, you said you have no problem getting people here, but I've also heard that people go ski and then they leave, so is there a need to keep people around in the winter time? And Are there ideas?
Yes, 100%. We have a really bad shoulder season and the winter season's pretty slow for businesses. Only a handful of them get ski traffic.
Yeah, I'm gonna second what Tanya said at the EV meeting. That was another thing people that kind of surprised me, is a lot of them were saying, especially the hotel, that they have very little. They have a very huge vacancy rate right now, and it really depends on the weather. And if people feel like dealing with driving back down, or they end up staying because they think it's going to be a good snow, so they want to spend the night and then ski again in the morning. But there was a lot of talk about that, how we think we get so much traffic in the winter, but we're not keeping the dollar in the winter.
Are there specific ideas? Are there, winter markets, or I think, holiday lighting as holiday festivities, events, maybe using First Street, testing that out in the winter is a something.
It seems like a challenge because of the weather. When it gets windy up here, people just don't want to hang out outside. And so we really need to, if we're going to do something like that, we have to have plans that can be incorporated into some of the local facilities that don't have to be outside. Perhaps.
What about like a partnership with Eldora, where if you bring in your ski pass, like maybe there's some coordination between business owners and Eldora. If you bring in your ski pass, you get 10% off or something.
Yeah, I think there's already businesses in town that leverage that.
Do that.
I know a couple businesses that have done different programs for people with ski passes, and I also, I think there's a couple of prime examples in town that do a really great job of capturing ski traffic. So.
Okay.
Maybe we could build like either through the Economic Vitality Task Force or something similar, a support team that could like help with what Steve just said. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. I think that's a good next step. And I think that now that you have that organization and that group gathering, that's something that they could work on. So
the Erdls used to have a really good relationship with the town back in the day when they owned Eldora. And it was more of a friendly environment, working with Eldora and being able to go up there, and it was very more family, almost family and friend oriented. I think that's been kind of lost with Eldora. They seem kind of an island unto themselves. So that's just my thoughts. I think that if we could bridge that gap, that would go a long ways.
Thanks for the feedback. I think our leadership team and management team at Eldora does a lot to try to integrate with the community and be available to folks in town. It's part of the reason that I'm sitting in the room tonight, and that we invest a lot of time into working with town to have a great relationship. So I think, it's different. It's not a family-owned business, but we are present in town and actively working to have a great partnership.
Well, by that I meant at the end of the season, they would have the, kind of like a kinetic sled race down the Bunny Hill. And it was more of a gathering in the parking lot for townspeople and things like that. I appreciate that you're in the room, and I appreciate your input.
I wonder if, the winter, thinking about potential, the flexible street, and just that events seem to be, if we can somehow use some event planning for those some off weekends, knowing that, yes, the weather is going to be a factor, but, if what type of planning we can do for some events on, weekends that weren't necessarily, Thanksgiving weekend or something, but just the random off weekends throughout the winter. We can work, engage the businesses and talk about what type of events we could do.
I'll tell you, one thing people like to do is eat dinner in ice fishing tents. And it's stupid, but it's true. Like,
Yes.
that's the thing. And so there are things we could do. And I think a lot of people who come through here, especially during ski season, are wearing ski pants and a jacket and are prepared for the weather. And I think the key is building a model where you build them an experience that you're not expecting somebody to come up from Florida who's like, just, oh, look, Netherlands cool kind of thing. You're kind of catering to the thing. And I think we could potentially build some really cool experiences using First Street, like Cheney had noted, and do things like that. And not like COVID, but like that same kind of idea, like how can we just do something a little different? Saunas, like that's probably not something we do because it's more expensive, but I think there's a lot of one-off experiences that we could do. I mean, we have a Zamboni. There's no reason that couldn't come downtown and do some cool stuff. I mean, there's opportunities, I think, if we think outside the box that could create these experiences that would really drive this traffic in the wintertime. Because I think what you see here is similar to like mountain towns where, when you have those peak traffic times, you really don't need to encourage more traffic. And in the slower traffic times, it's also about just capturing that traffic and keeping it for a period of time. But if we could figure out a way to do some things like that in just the off season, I think we could start building a model that's sustainable. To your point, I think, the other thing is there may be potential opportunities in the future, like as we look at the south side of the creek and the north side of the creek and making connections. And if we can get good relationships with everybody on both ends, we have this experience that is walkable now. And there's a lot of things that other communities do, like scavenger hunts in the wintertime where there's a prize, like maybe you win a gold nugget or something, or things like that. And I think we can lean into some of our history from different eras too. That's one of the cool things about Nederland is there's several different eras of history that are really cool to explore. And there might be opportunities to build experiences for people that don't overwhelm the town, that really bring people into that and like really let, a example of that is the PI is still here. That is a famous bar. And, I think that people like being attached to that history and knowing that. And that could be the starting point on a journey about the 70s potentially, or you go and you start at the museum and you look at that steam shovel and then you go, learn a little bit about mining and you go on an adventure to Mud Lake or whatever it is. But I think there's some ways that we can create a base camp out of what our downtown is, because, when you look at it, it's not, like Cheney said, it's not a Victorian downtown, and it never will be and never should be. It's a camp is what it was, and it's what it should be. And I think we can build that into what we're doing. And Andrew said really a little while ago, when people say, let's keep Nederland, I think that's what we need to interrogate with these spaces and what we're doing with them, and really try to build contextual experiences based on that. And I don't think we'll go wrong in that space.
Let's talk about First Street. So that's a major recommendation. It was the number one thing that was brought up with the community in the workshops. And so it's listed as a high priority and a big idea in the plan. And we are recommending this flexible street concept where, maybe you test it out next summer. Maybe that moves into the winter. Maybe there's a winter programming also that's tested out. So maybe 2025 is a testing year. But you really do need to start moving into some engineering to figure out, how the street can function in the future, and work with the community and business owners on those ideas. So I just want to, nod your heads, tell me I'm wrong. Is First Street a priority? Big infrastructure projects like this also disrupt businesses, and we want to acknowledge that and don't want to make it, be a downside and shut doors. Obviously, that'll be part of the construction phasing and all of that, but any ideas to bring up on First Street?
Yeah, I'm always interested in, I'm not quite sure what this means with the Festival Street, but what I envision is that it's like a pedestrian area in the summer or at certain times of day, or whatever, and there's, it's blocked off so people can drink outside and wander around and have fun.
There it is.
I always think that's a fantastic thing, and I wonder if there's any known resistance from current First Street businesses about that.
I think what we'd need to do is really have outreach to them and build it for them. And I think that's what makes it successful. For the drinking part, typically what you do is create a common outdoor consumption area is what it's called. And it's it works like a shared premise for the businesses. So they can basically have that as a part of their premise. And what a lot of towns do is they'll turn that on for certain events and then turn it off if it's not being used. And so I think what would probably be the best approach if we did this is to bring this idea to the business owners, specifically the ones that would be impacted, and really talk it through. And maybe there's opportunities to try smaller scale projects that could kind of show what that would look like on a temporary basis, but really make sure from a planning perspective, that's what it needs to be, is they need to drive it. And I think there's some questions that I have heard about how it would work and how we, our street, one of the things that makes a lot of pedestrian malls successful is they work like a spine and there's points of interest along the spine. And when you look at our business district, that's not the case. It's more like a wheel. And so what we would really need to do in this case is really build out contextually, again, similar to what we're talking about parking, like we need to map out that experience, because when somebody comes, they want to, you just need to make it easy for them to understand, what the task is, whether it's shopping or eating or whatever, and just make that an easy path for them. And I think the best way to do that is to work with those business owners. So I think that's the primary there. If this was the goal, is that would be an engagement step. Do you want to do this? If we did do this, here's some alternatives for how it could be done. And then to try like maybe a pilot project or two over the course of a summer where maybe one day the farmer's market could just be on First Street, and we'll set the license up for that to see what it would look like. And we did something similar with the Harvest Festival. That's like a temporary permit that would do the same thing. So it would work kind of like that, but it depends on the scale of what people want. You could scale it up or down just depending on the context.
Hi, this is Tanya. I like the Flex Street concept a lot. I do remember years ago there was some fear amongst retailers about losing that parking, that across the street from their business parking. But I think once we figure out our parking problems, maybe that wouldn't be the biggest fear for them anymore. I think it has huge benefits, and First Street needs to get fixed. I think it is a priority. It is dangerous. So I'm just on that level alone. But I wanted to bring the conversation back to what we were talking about, having events and winter things to bring people to stop. And we had this conversation in our budget meeting, the last meeting, and there was an overwhelmingly lack of support for that in the NDDA. We had wanted to allocate some money towards events other than the summer concert series, more like, and potentially hiring somebody to create these events in a cohesive and well vetted manner, not haphazardly put on by volunteers. And there was not support amongst this board. The basic thing that I kept hearing was NDDA doesn't put on events. NDDA should be all about infrastructure. So I'm curious what other NDDAs are doing regarding events. Is that something that is in the NDDA wheelhouse, or is that something that's just best left to private event promoters or town itself?
Mm-hmm.
Should we make a recommendation about exploring a Main Street designation that could be like maybe an offshoot of the DDA that could be more programming focused maybe, or?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yes, there are some DDAs that events aren't ever the main focus of a DDA, but there are many DDAs that do take that on and become kind of the event wheelhouse or coordinate certain events for programming specifically for downtown, but it's certainly not the sole thing that DDAs would focus on. They are typically more implementation, infrastructure, build things, organizations. So I like the Main Street. Gonna add that. And has Nederland ever been a Main Street? No.
Make a point about events. This is a topic that comes up almost every month in our meetings anymore, and we've done some stuff now with music, but events is a really important part of the way people feel about this town and sometimes what people come here for. But we rarely talk about what we envision in a very practical manner for events. And so I've read about what some other towns do with events and what they do with their event facilities, like performance spaces. And I think we need to really, really flesh out the notion of whether or not we want to invest in such a program and the facilities to do that kind of thing on a larger scale, because what we've done so far, a lot of what we've done is we host free events for people to get traffic here and to get some excitement going on for a period of time, for an evening or a day. But most communities that really, really invest in this, they don't stick with just that. They also, they have events that are paid events, and they hire, big name entertainment to come in and people buy tickets. And then that's a completely different business model with completely different skill set than what we're talking about right now. And we often talk about investing in this and doing this and thinking about it and planning it and how great it would be. But it's probably worth a bigger conversation about what's really involved if we're really going to invest and do something like that outside of the scope of this meeting tonight. But I think it needs to be on the radar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like the flexible street. I mean, is it maybe for this just investing first and foremost in like the gates that can actually close off the street and drive, create, not necessarily, saying that there needs to be music. It could just be, like the Netter, what's the Netter Days or the spring, any of those.
The farmer's market's really successful.
Yeah.
And I think having not that it needs to move, but having alternatives for how that could run is a good thing. I think the bigger point here from my perspective is that First Street needs to be addressed, and I would really like to move into design and engineering phase on that. And I think that when you look at what that street is and what it historically has been, you see it as, this hub of commerce. You look at pictures of it from the 1800s, that's what it is. I think similar opportunities exist on the south side of the creek. There is land over there near Chipeta that we could do things differently potentially. But I think when we look at that infrastructure, having a safe experience, and Janie's talked about this before too, about, well lit, where it's not, we can still have dark sky or requirements there, but make sure people can navigate safely and that, you're not worried about your kids running out in traffic because there's somebody who'd never drove here before coming down the same place where they're walking, or a person in a wheelchair who can't navigate past Sweet Sue's. There's opportunities for us to like really build this space out and think about it for not just what was good tomorrow, but maybe what's good 100 years, or maybe not 100 years, but maybe 30 years from now. Like, how do we want that space to be? Do we want it to have that flexibility in it, or do we want, how does that go? But I think that's a good point that you raised about how we look at that. And I think ultimately, if you think about this from an infrastructure support kind of point, that DDAs can do that programming, or they can build infrastructure. Building the infrastructure for a space that the community can use and can become a heart of the community and a hub of the community is a good thing. And then once that space exists, some of these conversations, I think, flesh themselves out naturally, maybe. People already love coming down there. It's just about making it easier. And
Cheney, when I look at the slides that you've got in some of the other portions here that show just a rendering of what First Street would look like from one end, it might be that if there's more examples that we could see, or just a little bit more fleshed out idea, it would give people enough to really get their teeth into. Because I think you're making a good point, Jonathan. This is if this is infrastructure, then this falls under the purview of the DDA.
Yeah. There will be more graphics in the final document. So we're in the kind of just the text phase right now, and we're working on getting it into a document that'll have lots of photos and renderings and things. So, good point. We will include lots of pictures. I was also trying to find, I've done for another DDA, we did a bunch of research. I looked at like 11 plan of developments, and I have a huge spreadsheet of like the things that they focus on. I can send it to Kate and she can forward it to you, but it summarizes like what other DDAs focus on. And the main things are infrastructure, wayfinding, sidewalks, and the events were on the lower side, but it can help you understand what other communities are doing. I think that's helpful. Okay. What?
Can I make one other comment about something on this page?
Mm-hmm.
Number 4, pedestrian lighting. So I think that there's a lot of awareness around tasteful lighting. And I know the point is to make it inviting and to make it safe, but there are, even today in 2024, there are structures that go up all over that do not pay respect to what tasteful lighting should be. And people around here are, some people, many people are very sensitive to what becomes essentially lighting pollution. And whatever we decide we need to do for pedestrian lighting, I beg the town to please keep it designed in such a manner that it focuses on what people need on the ground, that it doesn't pollute the entire sky, and it doesn't pollute people's homes close to the community. It's not hard, and it can be done, and it's done all the time. We just can't neglect to do that.
I agree with you. I think we can do that. I think we can find a good solution.
Can, I just
Yeah.
make sure we do.
What about the maintenance district? Can we get some feedback on that? Is that still, do you see that as an issue that needs to be addressed? Having a consolidated trash and recycling program for downtown that's better managed and.
I was listening to town budget meeting last night, and I think that one of the things that it sounds like the DDA could probably help be in more partnership with, is if the funding for park staff, and in addition, the trash cans, and, maybe there is this, maintenance district. I don't know. Yeah, I think, we know that there still continues to be trash and dumpsters, lots of different hard to access dumpsters that are on private property. I'm not sure necessarily if the, a sanitation district, so to speak, but more just the maintenance district of, if that's the smaller trash cans, and also really making sure, sidewalks are clear. Yeah, I think the maintenance district, and not even just First Street, but I mean, there's places, on Big Springs as well. And I know town's trying to do the best they can, but I think a maintenance district is important for, accessibility and just the appearance of things, people's first impression.
Yeah, I agree with you, Andrew. I think A would be it could take some of the pressure off of the Parks Department with dealing with trash, and maybe we can get the new sustainability coordinator involved in this conversation and finally get a town composting program developed. I don't know, what is it that the NDDA can do to organize it? Those are always the questions, like what is our next steps to do these things?
Yes, we will get there in the plan. We will try to outline that better so that the town board and the DDA board have marching orders. We just wanted to understand, is it still a priority at this point? And we'll work on, those next steps for you.
I think there's some opportunity there as well. Isn't there a new composting unit up at the transfer station? So I think like a maintenance district, there could even be an education piece there. I think there were a fair amount of restaurants in town that were composting, and there's been some real challenges in that zone in the last couple of years with what you can compost and is so having a new asset like that in town could be something that kind of springboards that. And then I think just stepping back a bit, when I look at the 5 items on the circulation, gateways, and parking page, and then I look at the 5 items on the recreation, tourism, and placemaking page, I really think about we have a lot of conversations around how we can work with the BOT and what we can do to move things forward. And I really feel like those, the 5 items on each page, those 10 items, if half of those happened in the next 5 years, it feels like Nederland would be a place where it's more feasible to have a performance space because the town's set up to function. Some of it, it's like things to improve the functionality of town on a daily basis that then springboard the ability to say you can have an event here because the parking is more formalized. It's easier for pedestrians to make their way through town. Oh, it got dark while an event was happening. They can make it back to their car. So it feels like those 10 items kind of set the town up to be able to be a functional space to have things happen. So I think that this is, I think sometimes that's where we can struggle is the focus. And it feels like those 2 pages to me are some really great focused things that we can look at going forward. So thank you.
Okay. I found my bubbles. You guys the people online can't see this. I'll voice it, but this is the research that we did in 9 different DDAs. We looked at their plan of developments and out of 169 projects, kind of grouped them. So other future DDAs, this was working for the town of Littleton. So the highest, the most projects that DDAs focused on in our research were connectivity and infrastructure, like a First Street project, intersection improvements, bridges. The next highest was development, reuse, and activation, filling vacant storefronts, helping gap fund development, bring in housing and the uses that you want. Next was signage, gateways, and public art. You guys are doing that. Streetscape and beautification, so adding lighting, maintenance district, things like that. To marketing, business, services, and events was kind of next to that. And then parks and open space, parking, and utilities and safety were the last ones. So just to give you some context of what other DDAs focus on. I don't think you're off track. Okay, we're at 8 o'clock. That really was where I wanted to, have those discussions before we finalize this, draft plan. We're putting it into a graphic document. We'll include lots of pictures and precedents and, give the reader a lot more context. But other than anything we talked about tonight, is there anything else that you feel like, was in a plan of development before that should be included or that we're not thinking about? I'll take that as.
One, I don't know that it needs to be added, but I think we had a comment earlier about, I guess, east and, well, maybe north and south side of the creek, like connections. And I know we have the loop in there, but do you think there's anything we can do to strengthen that idea of the entire district of the DDA, just to make sure that it's very clear that it isn't just First Street and Second Street that we're talking about?
Yeah. So I think the bridge will help with that. We talk about, oh, I'm blanking on the street name. Let me look on my map. Lakeview Drive, adding more parking there, having that be function more like a downtown street in the future. I think that will help if someone could, you know, park right there and easily walk across the bridge to get downtown. But yeah, let me think about that and weave in some language that helps reinforce that as well. Okay. I guess we're all tired. So let's get
Thanks,
out of here.
Janie. That was good.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheney. This was really helpful. Thanks for laying things out so wonderfully to be able to
Mhm.
send to everybody. This is really helpful.
So as far as next steps go, we're gonna work with John to get a joint meeting with the town board and planning commission to go through draft plan. Probably once we have it in the graphic format, we'll get all of these DDA ideas in there as well. And we're looking at probably a January adoption, January, February.
And then I think we talk a little bit about the sub-area plan still too, and I'm not sure timeline matches that exact, or the, not sub-area plan, the design, the guidelines. So we will provide, I guess, after we talk, we'll have an update on timeline, just make sure we've got everybody filled in on where we're at and participating. We'll have pizza.
Caffeine. Okay.
I was going to say, anybody have anything before we let Cheney go and we start on information?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cheney. All right, well, chair report. I don't have a whole lot to add tonight, just that, you know, I think as we, you know, just listen to this report and then also thinking about kind of beginning to have some work sessions with the BOT and, you know, trying to make sure that, you know, we're in agreement and, or not always in agreement, but generally aligned on the direction of things and realizing that, you know, it's just that question of what makes Nederland, and I just, you know, I look forward to working with the other boards and also, you know, the community, and just this is kind of an ongoing feedback where I don't necessarily see major changes or development happening, but slow progress on, as Steve said, like making little things more functional all over and improving the circulation. So I don't have a whole lot tonight. Treasury report, anything?
Nothing to add other than what's in the packet, and thank you to Kate, as always.
Thanks, Kate.
And I don't have anything to add to my report other than what's in there. Now, come back to him. I will say there will be an item from beautification next month about their budget because Judy has been working with our greenhouse, and she has some different ideas that are more sustainable and will save us money and will give us more flower pop. And so we're going to talk about that next month. And then flagging services, I have the final detail in there and everything, and it was under the $15,000 budget, and there's nothing really to add about that. They help through leaf peeping and were great to work with, so that's all done. I'll do public art too as well, since Danielle's not here. There's not really anything new to report. They're just sitting on go, kind of waiting for the budget to be approved to see what kind of ways that they need to go first. But you always see things from public art in January and February, so because they are on top of things. So hopefully we'll have some good news soon on that. And Riverwalk, we need some more. I need to follow up with Jonathan about Riverwalk, because the sidewalk piece that we've discussed that needs to move to 2025, it's in right away and CDOT and all sorts of stuff. And I got something from Nathan that I want to share with you. I just got it yesterday. And so I will share it with you and we can talk about next
The
steps.
ADA part from the bridge to the trail?
Yep.
Okay.
So that's still in our budget and that, but just know that there's some wonkiness with that. And so we had hoped to be able to make that whole area more accessible, but it might not look like we'll be able to do that within the budget. But again, you'll have more information about that as we get some clarity on that with town, because we really need to work together with Nikki on that.
Which area are you talking about?
From the covered bridge, we call it the S curve, but as you're coming down from the bridge and then you're joining the trail to go to Chipeta by the hotel, that's what we're talking about paving and doing some work on. But the grade is pretty steep, and so it would have to be cut a few different ways, and it goes into CDOT's right of way. So there's just a lot of different complications to it. But JVA put together a proposal for us, and I just want to make sure that it's in line with what town want, just us working together with park staff and everyone to make sure that it's on the up and up, because the budget's already been approved. It's just what's the best way to move forward, given the right of way stuff.
Is there any other business?
Yeah, and I have a couple of questions the board discussed last night, and Trustee Corvalon is on the meeting as well, so she can kind of reinforce this if anything comes. We've talked quite a bit about having a joint work session between the boards and trying to get that done and really start thinking about finding some consensus on how we move forward and maybe establishing just some how that works, and just like for everybody new involved, and make sure that that's a good working relationship. And I think you all know kind of where that conversation's been going. So one of the things I'd like to do is try to see what your appetite for that is. It sounds like the Board of Trustees would prefer to have it during one of your regular scheduled meetings or one of theirs, so that we're not adding another meeting to the schedule. And I just wanted to kind of raise that possibility. The other thing last night, and I'll give you a update as well, but the board has been working on their budget, and the town budget is in a situation, I'll say. I don't know if I'd call it a fiscal crisis, but it's not a great situation. We've had some things happen this year that I think created a perfect storm that have led to a rather large deficit in the town budget this year in the general fund. And it's a possibility that it's a short-term thing. We know that sales tax is down across the state. We know that there's a lot of factors that are affecting the revenue side. And we also know that the sheriff's contract, the sheriff services are just really expensive, and there's been a dramatic cost increase in that contract, and that's anticipated to continue into the future. So the board's been talking about some ways to fix that problem, but last night we were looking at around a $600,000 deficit in the general fund, which is pretty significant. And I think that staff is going to be able to get that down pretty far. We're going to have another meeting. We were originally thinking about approving the budget on the 3rd. We're going to delay that a week so that we can make sure that we get it right and we're being as fiscally responsible as possible. But we don't have much on the expenditure side to cut. It's mostly thinking about revenue and then thinking about just being really strategic with funding. And so that's a bigger conversation. I can tell you more about it. But what came out of that last night was two things. And I just want to raise them. And these aren't things that you necessarily have to tell me tonight, but I just wanted to ask, the board asked last night. One was, you have in your budget a couple of part-time parks employees that are focused on downtown in the summertime. And one thing that we were wondering, we're down a parks employee right now, and we were wondering if you would consider changing that to one full-time employee. So we could hire a full-time parks employee. We can make an arrangement or however we want to do it to kind of talk about how they spend their time downtown to make sure that that's, adequate for everybody involved and that we're all understanding and comfortable with what that looks like. Another question that came up was related to the visitor center. And I think what the board recognizes, there's a lot of expertise with the business owners downtown and within the DDA and just running businesses. And, I think the town wants that to be a town asset. We want a visitor center. This year has been the lowest year we've had because we've had some staffing issues, and there have been 11,889 people through the visitor center. And that's with probably running at maybe 40%. So it tells you how impactful that building is. And I think one of the things we'd really like to do is, as a town, is work with the businesses to promote their businesses in the visitor center and maybe have a better consignment program so they can sell their things. We talked about potentially a volunteer program for artists if they want to have their space there. But we just wanted to raise the conversation. Is there any potential to partner on visitor center operations and that space? And it's not something that needs to get answered today, but we do have our budget presentation. So I wanted to ask those two questions. In terms of an update for the town, we've been working really hard on trying to bring a lot of the projects that have been going on for a long time to a conclusion. We have two really big mobility kind of projects. They're called TIPS and Safer Main Streets. And they both are grants that we have gotten with CDOT. And basically what the Safer Main Streets grant is doing is creating safe crossings. I think you guys may have heard about this before, but safe crossings across the highway with blinking flashers so that people can cross with some kind of warning to traffic, and then some sidewalk work and reworking First Street over by Town Hall, and kind of the connection between the RTD lot and downtown, so we get a better streetscape in there. Those projects are coming to a conclusion. We've been working with CDOT. We should have concurrence relatively soon. One of them is a federal grant, and it just requires a lot of pieces to make it work right. So that's where we're at on that. And then, this last weekend, we've started to see snow come. We've had maybe not super significant snowfall, but enough. Our plow ops guys have been out. I hope that you have seen them and seen them working, and that we've been really working hard to train and make sure that we're working with our partners at CDOT on how we push snow around and where we push snow. That's been a really good relationship this year since I've been here. And I got to thank Everett for that. He's really driven that effort, and that's been awesome. So I think our guys have been working good together. We need feedback if you have it. We have our Plow Ops app that you can see the plows moving around. We have a snow removal plan that is going to be published soon, and is basically what we've had for forever, but it's just going to be written, and we're going to make sure it's easily accessible. But the essential kind of goal of our program is to keep emergency access open all the time and kind of our main thoroughfares, and then we work on neighborhood streets after that. So there's a prioritization there, and there's kind of basically our trigger, 4 inches of snow is a kind of a big trigger for us on how we remove snow and how fast and all of that. But you should see our guys out and working, and if you have any feedback about that, I'd love to hear it, or your neighbors do. We want to make that work for everybody. We have a limited staff, and that's a hard job, and we want to make sure they're safe. And so we've been really trying to make sure that they get breaks when they need it, and that we're working with property owners to make sure we've got walls marked and things like that, just things that happen when stuff gets buried. So that's been a big thing for us this last little bit. And then finally, like I said, this budget, we've been really working hard on the budget, and it's going to be a hard year for us next year, but I think that there is a lot of optimism about what's happening in Nederland right now. I think that the opportunities to build the things that keep Nederland and to support that and to preserve that is really strong right now. And I think, we have everything kind of going on right now, from moonshots that could be crazy ideas that, we should chase down and just make sure we understand, to the things that y'all have been working on for 20, 30 years that we just got to keep plugging away at. And I think, I've always tried to live by a motto of we make stuff happen and then we get stuff done. And I think that we have had a lot of pins set up. I think you guys have done a lot of work to make stuff happen and set the pins up. And now it's time to knock them down. And that's honestly the fun part. So we just got to get to that. And I think 2025 is our year to do it. So if you have any specific questions about for me what's going on in town, I'm happy to answer them. But that's kind of what has been on my mind for this last couple of months here.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, for that. One input I have is with snow removal, I think it's great. Like I live on Big Springs and I own a building on Big Springs. So I see them, plowing that really well, especially up through the residential neighborhoods. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that could be done to clear the parking spaces that we built lower down on Big Springs, because those tend to get really slammed in with the snow. And I think part of that is a parking issue, that maybe some cars are parked there all the time. And, especially like out in front of my building and the Black Forest building, where we put in a lot of parking, those tend to not get cleared. And I have a feeling it might be because of allowing cars to stay there all the time.
That issue does happen frequently, and we don't have we try to call people and say, hey, could you help us out? And I think that's a message we really want to enforce is, we don't have a great enforcement mechanism, but it makes everybody's life better if we can get cars off the street when there is a snow. And then I will talk to my guys about snow storage. Maybe there's some things we can do to, especially if we can work with those folks and just keep, access to them when we need it. It might be something that we can address relatively easily. So I'll get back with you on that if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a good point, because I see like the grader coming through for the street, but that's not a great tool for getting into those parking spaces, whereas like a front end loader or something like that, could get in and scoop those and move it to where it needs to go. So thanks. Yeah, I think that would be great.
So my question is a process question. So you asked about the funding of those things. Will they need to have a special meeting after the BOT meets next or before the BOT meets next to formally add or decline that request?
Well, we're coming to you with this relatively late, and I was anticipating a discussion, and I didn't think you'd be prepared to make a call tonight. What I would love to do is tell the BOT it's a possibility if possible, and we could work on this next year maybe. And that parks position, the honest truth is Nikki has a lot of work that needs to get done around town, and she's got 3 guys and herself, and she's going to get her CDL. I think she started that today, so that's a really cool thing for her, and I'm glad she's doing that. But if we could figure that out, parks, we all know when park season comes, for the most part, and what really affects you is more, spring, summertime. So I would just, if it was possible to tell the BOT, this is something that we're discussing, I think it would be a really cool thing that might really help the town out. And I think we could really build a good partnership around it. And then on the visitor center, what my vision for that space is, I think we all, I don't remember not seeing that visitor center like it is right now. And I think there's an opportunity to really think about what makes Nederland special. And I think that's what I hear people talk about all the time is like what has made Nederland special. And I think like we just need to reinforce those things. And I think the visitor center is kind of our first step to doing that. That's where people come. That's where you tell them we have this really cool Wildblood Nature Center that's up the hill that you should go check out, and like all these different things that you can do. And the artists, we have such a robust and vibrant artist scene here. And those people don't necessarily always have a place to go. There's not only not a path to ownership, there's not even a path to renting a space sometimes. So if we could create a really cool way to be like, hey, Spinning Silica is over there, just go check it out. Or you can go check out this really cool music store over there. Or, you can get whatever you're going to get and like really build these experiences in. And I think there's some ways we could do that using digital technology like QR codes and things like that. We've talked about even putting like an old antique soda machine where maybe some of our people who make juice in the community and things like that, they could sell it in that. So it'd be like a local, it's a pop machine, but it's you're getting something local. And there's some opportunities I think we have to like really color outside the lines there and make it a Nederland visitor center. But when you think about that, like on a down year, we have almost 12,000 people through it. That just shows you what the value of that is to our community. And if we can really use that to be part of this wayfinding strategy and like say, this is how we start our story. Because I think a lot of people, they see those bathrooms or they know they're there, or they know that coffee shop is there, but they don't necessarily know what step 2 is after that. And that's what we need to use for that facility, I think. And I think getting to the same point, the business owners have expertise there. The town has resources. And I think if we were able to create a partnership there, that space could just be super cool.
Staffing it, or putting there?
I think I'd love to talk about all of that. The staffing help could help us a lot if that was available. And one of the things I've been thinking about is early in your budget conversation, you've been talking about whether you needed admin support, and maybe there's an opportunity to share something along those lines. And I don't think that conversation really, I think that it, as you guys were talking about more critical things, that conversation just has paused. But I think that there's an opportunity between the town and the NDDA to really talk about what might be possible. And so I don't know if Trustee Corvalon wants to add anything to that, but I think what the BOT was asking me is there a possibility to work with the DDA in a way that just makes that a resilient and sustainable space for the community, and kind of recognizes that that's kind of if you think about it, it's kind of the touch point between the DDA and the town in a lot of ways, like where everything kind of comes together.
Are you talking about the visitor center right now specifically, or just an extra admin person that could be?
The visitor center support that we were talking about.
Yeah, I think the visitor center, well, it came up because it operates at a loss of $40,000 at least. And one of the trustees wanted to shutter it. She says, why would we keep something open and losing money? And that is true. In a normal business, you would close part of your business that was losing money. So, but we know that the visitor center is so much more than just a revenue maker, and it provides a place for all the downtown businesses to have a voice. So we felt like it could be a space that the NDDA could collaborate by providing, well, on just like the budget line, like staffing for it, and that would help our budget. But ultimately, the relationship should be bigger than that, where we, in our joint session, would be a good time to talk about it. What do we see the function of the visitor center for, and how can it help our businesses and our tourists and residents have a better experience when they come to town? I've visited lots of different visitor centers around, and I think they are important. And so it was not, that idea to close it was not popular. It was really only just that one trustee, but it's true. So we do need help to keep it open. And so I just don't know if the NDDA wants to have this as an agenda item one day, or we kind of brainstorm how there could be a collaboration between town and NDDA with this visitor center, and with the businesses, what do they want in the visitor center? So that, but on a practical level, one of the asks would be, is there any way to put in our budget, NDDA budget, a line item to help with staffing for it? Because if we keep it, if it's open more hours, we can provide more of those informational items that can help our businesses and have a better experience for our tourists and residents, like I said. So if we can't afford to keep it open more than just like weekends, then that's what we'll do. But if we can get extra funding, we can have it open more hours.
So
In the summer. So that was one of the things, for sure. But, and I do think we need to have this joint session so that people can kind of hear how the BOT are feeling about projects they want help with. And then the parks person, I think it's pretty clear that if we had an extra person working on parks, the Chipeta Park would look better, the snow would get plowed off the sidewalks faster, trash would be cleared out. It would all around help the NDDA district. And if the town of Nederland can't afford to have that fourth person due to budget constraints, it would be harmful. So that is why it seems like a pretty straightforward request to ask the NDDA to help fund this person, especially until we can figure out the budget long term. So I don't know.
You know, some things that come to mind, these are just kind of brainstorming. It may not be practical at all, but I believe, you know, the Parks Department does clean the bathrooms at the visitor center, right? And also, you know, there are times during peak season, which peak traffic, suddenly, you know, there could be actually different seasons of peak traffic where we've paid flaggers to stand on the side of the road and they weren't really that busy. And often you need an extra flagger just to relieve, you know, the two flaggers that are, so, you know, if that visitor center could somehow function as a warming hut, you know, greeter, flagger base, but also, you know, if the parks, if additional funding to a full-time parks person, you know, part of that is, you know, part of the visitor center is the bathrooms. I mean, I think and also engaging, the local artists, be it arts and crafts, doing little pop-ups where, if what we have to do is maybe allocate some funding and organization for administration of like, here's the schedule. We know there's going to be probably some need for some traffic control, and we could just have an extra flagger because if some subcontract workers wouldn't presumably be as much overhead as a full-time employee. And if those could be on the weekends, just some ideas.
So if the visitor center was staffed, would that mean that the bathrooms would be open? Because that is something that, as I've been walking around, a lot of businesses bring up because there's been those Monday holidays and they feel when those bathrooms aren't open, especially like the rock shop where they have kids and families that want to go to the bathroom and there's nowhere for them to go.
I would like to keep the visitor center open. Ideally, we'd have it open 7 days a week. I think there may be in this first year, like Tuesdays are typically not a big day over there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we could look at that and just can do it contextually during the season.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would really like to do, we have kind of scheduled one person. What we have planned right now is a 30-hour person,
mm-hmm.
and then a couple of part-time people to kind of fill in the gaps. And then I've got Peter, who's our public engagement officer,
mm-hmm.
would be working there on Tuesdays, and I think maybe Wednesday's the day that we've been kind of contemplating closing.
Mm-hmm.
But if we were able to do that, I think we could be more consistent with the restrooms, because what happens right now is park staff opens the restrooms and they're not here when there's a holiday. But if we can have that center open, then they can just open the bathrooms. And I think the other thing that'll help is toilet paper situation, because park staff can only come and staff it or come and stock it once in a while, and we get in heavy seasons. I think that also is an issue. So I think there's a lot of potential that we could really greatly improve that. And I think that 30-hour person, or Peter potentially, and I think we could talk about this, but in some of the things about coordinating, like, and having that piece that we've talked about a little bit before, like making sure everything is coordinated on both ways, that person could be, I think, helpful to that, to make sure that we've got, the help for the flaggers, we've got the help to make sure we know when events are happening, so we can communicate that back and forth. And maybe, there's a lot, I think that we could find a good way to do that. No, currently we have essentially 3 part-time people that are doing it. And it used to be a little bit more on a volunteer basis, and now it's paid staff, but we've got a couple of younger kids that do it, and then a couple other people that have been involved. And what we'd like to do is have one person who has a little bit more frequent hours, so like 30 hours. So it's not really a full-time, but you're, more than just a little part-time job. And then our college kids that we have 2 of them that can really fill gaps and do weekends and things like that a lot easier. So what I think will happen is we'll be able to be consistently open at least Thursday through Monday, which is kind of what I've been aiming for. And if we can get Tuesdays with Peter in there, because Peter is a salaried employee and he could do his office hours there essentially, and then he could run the center, which is part of his duties that he's already paid for. So that's kind of what I was thinking from a staffing model. But where we need the support is that it's just the operations. We just need to make sure that it's a whatever percentage of revenue we're comfortable with it capturing, that it's doing that, and that it's open consistently so people know it's there. Because I think too often it just looks closed. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do, is just make sure it's consistently open all the time on a schedule that we all would agree on. And I think even if we're not able to come to an agreement on what, if you're able to support it this year, I'd love to continue this conversation and really talk about making it a cool space and making sure that the inventory is right and that it's supporting things. We have like Mountain Goat Teas, for example. They would really like to have a sandwich board there, because where they're located, sometimes it's hard to navigate. That's something that came out during the comp plan, is that there's some belief that retail location is a little bit hidden away just the way it is, but they would like to have like a sandwich board there. So there's opportunities, I think, like that with the visitor center, where we can really say, there's a really cool shirt shop over there or whatever, go visit this, that, or the other, and maybe use some of that space. And then Andrew mentioned we could overhaul our peddler's license, getting a little more technical, and use some of that space around there on public right of way, which we don't currently allow, so that somebody who has like an artist maybe who wants to sell their whatever it is that they have, they could have that space and do like a temporary business license with the town, so they're not you know, like super invested in it and have it for a weekend or whatever. And we are fairly confident that would be pretty popular. So there's just some ways that we could, I think, kind of lean into what I think people like about this farmers market and make it kind of the visitor center support that.
Both of these.
Yeah. Right. And I think one of the things with the visitor center that we discussed is last year they were optimistic in the revenue that they thought they would get, and they had it at about $100,000. And then, like I said, we had this perfect storm and they weren't able to staff it the same. We had a lot of staff turnover this year, including myself, obviously. And so they didn't achieve that goal. So what we did, the finance director and I, is we went through all the line items in the town budget and looked at where we hadn't achieved the revenue goals that had been set, and we reduced them. And that's part of the reason why there is this deficit in that fund. But I think that what we set as the revenue goal for 2024 or 2025, sorry, is reasonable. I think it's set at $50,000. If we're able to keep it open consistently based on what has happened in previous years, I think we'll see that happen. And one of the things I'd like to do, like I said, is, you know, a drink machine makes a whole lot of sense there, just because the first place you stop, you go to the bathroom, you could get, you know, even if you get water, that's great. But there's some, I think, looking at our inventory and just making some really good choices about what people want. There's a really cool antique cigarette machine over here that we've been looking at that we could sell little pieces of art through, like, which is something other communities do. That's really cool and kind of a Nederlandy kind of thing. So I think what we need to do is we need to get to the, you know, how do you make that an experience people want to engage in? And I think that's consistency, good information, cool stuff. And then I think we're kind of cruising along, and that thing will be humming and supporting the downtown district.
So that was running
No, it was really about revenue projections. And I think what happened to a lot of towns is in 2020 through 2023, really, there was a huge uptick in tourism in the mountains, and that was great. And then when you couple that with ARPA, it was kind of a flush situation. And now that's changing a little bit. So as sales tax has gone down, there was enough revenue to model it, but I think we're seeing just a flattening there. And so what we've got to do is just make sure that we're adjusting. And I think that adjustment is what's happening right now. And so that's what we try to do with the budget. I think if we achieve the budget we have, it's going to be self-sustaining. It's just, this is the correction year, and we've got to show, you know, it needs to break it. I don't even know if it really needs to break even, but it needs to recover whatever percentage of revenue it is that the town thinks is important for it. Because like Tanya said, a visitor center is not necessarily a revenue producing business, but it does need to support its own operations as much as humanly possible. And as an example, like in rec, which is a little bit different, but like for a long time, you would want a rec center to be like 24 to 35% cost recovery, just because of, like, you know, what it's providing to the community. And we need to figure what that number is out as a group, I think, about what we'd want it to recover. Because you know, the other piece of it is you don't want it to make so much revenue that people aren't going to the shops. You want to point to the shop, but there's an opportunity to have complementary things there and all that. So it's kind of a big conversation, but if we could get some support for it, I think it would be great. And I really wanted to be a little vague about what I'm asking for, because this is your money. And I think part of it is the board recognizes that we need to come and work on this relationship with the DDA so we can get to the get stuff done part of this equation, which I think we all want. But I think first step is recognizing that this is your budget and you've got priorities, and we need to be collaborative in this space.
I mean, it seems that if a maintenance district were a priority and visitor center was within that maintenance district, and also, you know, some of the, knowing that it's best for the park staff to, you know, I wonder if it's talking about allocating some budget towards a maintenance district that would include funds for the visitor center and an additional or a full-time parks employee, provided that the maintenance district was what, in line with what we happening boundaries of the
parking employee.
I think that would be the best option for us, because then we can have them working more equipment too, which would help. You know, they could be driving the gator, which on a part-time employee, we have just with what happens in a part-time, you hire them and then they're here for a short time and they can't necessarily get trained on all the equipment. But if we had this full-time person, I think there might be more capacity. You know, we've been talking about trash cans and all these things, but I think that would be the benefit, is that we'd have somebody who's trained on all our stuff. And then I think we're open to talking about what that looks like. A big part of what happens in parks is at Chipeta. That's like one of the big things. And then we have noxious weed program, which we do all over the place, you know, that goes all over town, basically on any town-owned property. And they take care of, there's, you know, our various smaller parks like Tilden and things like that, that just are in the neighborhoods. But I think that a 4-person department works really well for us. And we could really, I think we could come up with a scope of service and what that would mean, and just really, so everybody's clear on what those responsibilities would be related to the downtown. I think it wouldn't be a dramatically different price. I think what we anticipate, and we do benefits, so the cost is higher than this, but I think we're anticipating a hiring range of like between 40 and 47,000, depending on qualifications. That's usually what they hire at. And if they have a CDL, that would be something we'd maybe bump them a little bit. But and I don't think we'd expect the DDA to pay that. I think we're just looking to see if there's any appetite to just change that arrangement a little bit.
Currently for the 2 part-time, was it like 20,000 that we were paying in, or?
Yeah, it wasn't, I think that was like total cost or something like that. And I think that sounds about right to me. Yeah. And I think at one point you had talked about 3 positions, but I think that was hard to hire, I believe.
Online, I guess I think I'd like to be able to have Jonathan, knowing that he's working on a budget, hear from us collectively, go around the room if we're open to, you know, this dialogue, ongoing dialogue. Steve?
Yeah, I'm open to it. And I think, you know, we're exploring a little bit more detail here. And then, as Jonathan's saying, you know, purposely being a little vague, but yeah, I think it's something that's worth continuing to discuss and be open to.
Yeah, I agree with Steve K. And I think that there's some potential there with a visitor center, and I think it kind of ties into a lot of stuff that we talk about trying to accomplish. So I think it's worth trying to figure out how to work together.
Barb? Are you?
I don't really have any comments.
Okay. Everett?
I want to think about it a little bit more, honestly.
Yep. Scott?
I'm open to entertaining the conversation. I think that if it makes the experience of being here better, either for visitors and for us as a town, we should be talking about it. But I also think that we should then be looking at our own DDA budget as to where we can, I don't want to say cut costs, but I think we have to be responsible about the way we spend money. And so if we're gonna spend more on that, then we need to be mindful of how we're budgeting and spending money elsewhere in our own budget.
Thanks, Scott. Nathan?
Yeah, I think it's worth a great conversation, but kind of to Scott's point is about prioritization of the budget. But I think what you say certainly makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of good crossover and collaborative opportunity here.
Are you all comfortable if in my next budget presentation, I just say that we have met and that you are, can I say that we're open to continuing the conversation? I know Everett, you said you wanted to think about it a little bit more, but I won't promise anything. That's one of the reasons I'm not saying. I want to really make sure I'm coming to you from a collaborative standpoint. I know that that's something that we need to work on between the 2 boards, and recognizing that you guys have priorities in a budget and things that you have to do in the town too. And I think that that relationship really requires us all, you know, saying what we need to have and really taking care of each other in that space. So is that something you feel comfortable with me saying, is that we had a conversation, you're open to the discussion, without promising that we've made a, we haven't agreed on anything yet. We're just saying that that conversation could happen.
Online, can you raise your hand if you agree?
Right. So we're definitely in agreement as a board to continuing the conversation.
Thank you guys for listening to me talk. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you taking this and thinking about it.
You know, Jonathan, one of the things that might be helpful for us is if we have a good sense that, especially on that park employee person, if we're going to take 2 part-time figures out of the story, thanks, Steve, sorry, and then put 1 full-time one in, we want to make sure that we're also addressing what we wanted to address with the 2 part-timers, that's part of what's getting done as well. You know, and we know that one person can't do everything. We just want to make sure that we're not ignoring what we wanted to do in the first place.
Would you be comfortable if I draft a scope of service document that might show some what you're talking about there, and then you guys could consider it, or?
Yeah, I mean, we have to define it, so we may as well start with a draft, yeah.
Okay, and then you guys could take it from there and figure out what works best. And okay, and this is one of those things, we do have our budget, but what I really wanted to do is indicate to the board whether or not this is a possibility. If it's something we figure out next year, like in the middle of the year, it still supports the town and helps the town out a lot. And I think I just really appreciate your openness to be willing to do that. And I will make sure I give you some, I told you a lot of vague things tonight, but I do not expect you to, approve what I'm saying just on my loquaciousness. So I will provide you with staff reports and analysis so you can see, and then you guys could use that. I know I'm not your staff person, Kate is. So we can work together and make sure that you guys have an opportunity to have that conversation without me, putting pressure there. So I think that's really what we want, is to just start building these little opportunities for collaboration where they make sense.
You know, those 2 part-time people were, the purpose of that was they fell into the beautification category, right? And so if we're still addressing beautification in some way or another, by either making things more functional or cleaner or more orderly or whatever, then I think there's some common ground to be found, probably.
I agree.
Although I would just add to that I think they were fairly specifically in the context of garbage cans on First Street and keeping things clean.
Well, I still want my garbage can.
Yeah, we want the garbage cans. All right. Well, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you.